all right, I can do hard things. I can do literally anything. I beat cancer. Put me in the toughest room. I can handle it. And I've had this realization where, yeah, maybe you can, but that doesn't mean you have to. I think I had this mentality post cancer of I am invincible. I can do literally everything. And again, I still think I can do whatever I put my mind to. But that doesn't mean I need to put my mind to things that are going to be damaging just because I've already been through damaging experience so far. So I've definitely found a lot more softness with myself and with like my life where I'm like, yeah, no, I really actually don't need to be this hyper focused person that can do all the hard things. I want soft things.
Hey everyone, welcome to season 3. This is Shauna.
And this is Rosalina, and we're your hosts for Too Young for This Shit podcast. This podcast is not just about boobs, but our journey with cancer. We are young millennials, open about giving you our raw and unfiltered look into our lives. We are in no way medical professionals, nor are we offering medical advice. Any medical references are cited directly from public websites or from our personal diagnosis. Some topics and stories may be triggering to those who are fighting, have fought, or have loved someone with cancer. Hi everyone, this is Rosalina.
And this is Shauna. Welcome back to the Too Young for This Shit podcast. Today we are so excited to have the co-hosts of the podcast Cancer Actually Fucking Sucks. We have the co-hosts Maddy Pollack and Shannon Cury. A little about them. Maddy was diagnosed with stage 2 Hodgkin's lymphoma 5 years ago when she was just 24 years old. Following her treatment, Maddy became a certified integrative nutritional health coach, forming Be Your Health. She also started Cancer Actually Fucking Sucks. Shannon was diagnosed 3 years ago with Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at 29. Shortly after finding out she was in remission, Shannon found the practice of breathwork, and these days she's a breathwork and authenticity coach. Similar to Rosalina and I, Shannon connected with Maddy over social media and joined Cancer Actually Fucking Sucks as her co-host in 2021. So thank you so much, Maddy and Shannon, for being here. We're so excited to have a conversation with you and get to know you and your stories.
Yes, thank you for having us. So excited to be here.
So let's just get started maybe about your cancer journeys. Maddy, you can start. You were obviously 24 when you were diagnosed, but just give us a rundown of how it all went.
Yeah, try to keep it short and sweet. But yeah, so I was diagnosed at 24 in 2018. In terms of symptoms, I had chest pain for like over a year. And I just always thought it was like a muscle or something weird. And then it started getting really bad where I was getting short of breath. I couldn't really work out. And then I had 2 swollen lymph nodes in my armpit. So I went to urgent care because I was scared I was having like a heart issue. My left arm also felt very tight and weird. And then at urgent care, my EKG came back weird. They told me to go to the hospital. I was also living in Austin, Texas at this time. I'm in LA now. I'm from LA. So then went to the ER and they found a mass in the x-ray. And like in the intake room, the doctor was like, you might have lymphoma. And I was like, you're crazy. And I definitely don't have cancer. I don't know what you're talking about. And so from there, it was a lot of like roller coaster of emotions. Doctors were like, you don't have it. My biopsy came back inconclusive, my needle biopsy. Then I went home to LA just to be with my family, get everything actually checked out from doctors we know and are comfortable with. And yeah, then I was diagnosed with stage 2 Hodgkin's lymphoma. I had a big mass in my chest, so they were right. And from there, I did chemo for 4 months, ABVD, and then did radiation for about a month. And then I was done in January of 2019 with treatment, and I moved back to Austin, Texas. From there, started doing lots of other things, but right after was really when shit hit the fan for me, where sure we'll talk about, but that's a diagnosis story for me.
So how are you feeling when you first got diagnosed? Were you having issues like processing all the information, processing your diagnosis? You said we thought the doctor was a little insane.
Yeah, the doctors in Austin were like absolutely horrible. Like I will say, they were terrible. Their bedside manner was horrible. It was so weird. But I got diagnosed officially in Los Angeles, and I like woke up from my biopsy surgery to the doctor being like, you have Hodgkin's lymphoma. I was more scared about what the treatment would be. But I was relieved to have an answer because I was having issues for a long time, like over a year, like I said, chest pain, and I just didn't understand what was wrong, and my body felt very weird. So it was a weird feeling. I almost felt relieved of, okay, this is what's happening. Now let's like figure it out. And then yeah, I was really nervous about what the treatment would be. Like, I was so terrified of chemo, as because what we see is terrifying on movies and TV and all that. And it is just scary in reality too. So that was how I felt when I was first diagnosed.
Yeah, I can't even imagine at 24 too, and you're just like starting to live your life after college and get on your feet, and then to just
Right.
be like totally derailed by a cancer diagnosis. But like you said, at least you did have like answers to what was going on in your body. I'm not saying that it was like the best answer, but at least you got to finally understand what was happening. Now, Shannon, can you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Yeah. So I was actually diagnosed in 2020. My symptoms, it's hard to say like when they started. April 2020, when shit hit the fan with COVID, I was living in New York City at the time, and I moved down to stay with my family in Florida for a bit. I like really thought I was going to tough it out in my 1 bedroom, 1 sink apartment. And I was like, no, I am not New York strong. I need natural light and fresh air. And shortly after I got down there, I had a bald spot on my head. And we thought it was alopecia. And it was alopecia, like stress induced. But there's definitely part of me in hindsight that I'm like, was that my body being like, ma'am, there's a problem. You should probably look at that. And especially because it was COVID, it was just so hard to chalk up to what was stress, what was like just a product of the times. But throughout April to July, I had back pain and yeah, just I think that was like the primary one initially. And then in July, I started to notice like a chest rash, which was interesting. And I would drink wine and get like very lightheaded and like very dizzy. And I was at that time pretty accustomed to drinking. So I was like, this is strange. I don't know what's happening here. August started to turn into like chest pain and like a cough. And again, like with a cough, I smoked a lot of weed. So I was like, I've always had a cough. And so I really just blew that off too. But the fatigue started to get to me. So I finally, and it was 2020. So I would go to the doctor, get a COVID test. It would come back negative, and I'd be like, okay, I'm fine. It must be in my head. And after a couple rounds of that, I finally, when they said it was pneumonia, so I did antibiotics for 6 weeks. And then when I went back at the end of the treatment for pneumonia to get another chest x-ray to make sure that it was gone, essentially, they were like, yeah, it hasn't changed at all. You should get a CT scan. Insurance denied the CT scan as I was waiting for an appointment with my pulmonologist. I didn't have one yet. I was scheduling one. I started to have 10 out of 10 chest pain. And my mom came up to New York City at that point. I was back in New York. And finally went to the pulmonologist, and he was like, you need to go to the ER. I was like streaming tears. I was like, I don't want to. I don't want to get COVID. Because at that point, that was like my worst case scenario. It was like summer 2020. And all of my symptoms were like chest pain, cough, very similar. Finally, we bargained and I went to the hospital. And that was on a Monday. The next 3 days were like a whirlwind where, especially because essentially what happened was my sternum broke, which was what the 10 out of 10 chest pain was. I was on like painkillers pretty much the entire time. And they did the whole, we think it's an infection. They flooded me with antibiotics. It wasn't changing. What is it? My like white cells weren't changing, which were supposed to change when you have an infection. And by that Tuesday night, they were like, okay, we think we need to start preparing for this potentially to be a tumor. Like hopefully not, but it could be. And at that point too, they didn't say lymphoma. They just said a tumor. So I was like, great, I have a tumor in my chest. I'm going to die. So don't remember that night at all. Like that Tuesday night, totally blacked that out due to trauma. And then that Wednesday, went in for a biopsy, came out. And that's when well, actually, that's not true. They told me right before. They were like, we did some preliminary labs. This is lymphoma. We're going to go in, kind of open you up, figure out exactly what it is so we can get a plan. I was put in a quarantine room because my chest pain was so bad, I couldn't cough to do the TB test. So they had to treat me like I could possibly have TB, where I was like, I clearly have cancer. We just found that out. Like, please, like, put me around humans. But for that 4 hours, essentially, I was in a room by myself. No nurse call button. I really have a lot of strongly worded feedback from Mount Sinai. But that time, I think like the mixture of trauma response, painkillers, anesthesia, and I also feel like I had like such a deep spiritual awakening that I was like, all right, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to beat the shit out of this. And I had a lot of like clarity around like all of the ways that I wanted to live my life differently when I got out of it. And when I finish up that bullshit, then had 6 rounds of chemo, EPOC R, and moved to Philly to do that. and was like very grateful that my family was able to like move with me. And I was like obsessed with my job at the time too. So I like stopped work that Monday and like didn't look back for 6 months. And yeah, just focused entirely on treatment and have been in remission since April 2021.
So glad to hear that you're in remission.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine also being told you have cancer, having surgery, and then being in an isolation room alone and having to process that information.
Yeah.
That is insane to me. Now, and you said you
Yeah.
found like a lot of clarity and I'm going to beat this. Was that in isolation or was that kind of like the days after?
Yeah, no, that was in isolation. It took my sister, I love her so deeply, both. And again, this was COVID time. So my mom and my sister were in the hospital, but technically weren't supposed to have visitors. Like we're only supposed to have one person for an hour at a time, but they were just like running throughout the hospital all day trying to figure stuff out. But they like literally smuggled me my cell phone at one point, 2 hours into my isolation. And I remember FaceTiming with them and they were like, yep, like it sucks. It's cancer, but like we just sat with a thoracic surgeon for like 2 hours. He explained everything to us. You're going to be okay. And so having that clarity of, and again, there is no good kind by any means, but I think it initially took that prognosis is good. There is a strong chance I beat this and I am going to fully attach to that and believe there is not a single other option. And I ran with that like right away.
It's funny because in the breast cancer community, you'll hear people say, oh, it's you have the good breast cancer. You have the good breast cancer. I didn't realize that was similar in the Hodgkin's, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma community as well. So that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Shannon, you maybe have a similar experience, but every single person I talked to, doctor, was like, you have the good cancer. You're going to be fine. I'm like, okay. Well, so I thought too that treatment wasn't going to be, I thought it was just going to be like a chemo pill or something, which like obviously sucks. And now I know that. So it was just interesting. And yeah, don't ever tell anyone they have the good cancer. What does that even mean? Yeah. Just, I hear that so much from other survivors. So
yeah, I also was told that too. And I still had to go through like painful treatments.
Right.
Chemotherapy, radiation, hormone therapy.
Exactly.
No, it's not very cancer.
I took solace in it coming from a doctor at that time. I think in that moment, it was what I needed to hear. But it's the type of thing where with reflection, I'm like, oh no, don't tell me that. But it's not something for anyone to say to anyone else unless it is, again, in that moment, I was like, okay, great, cool. I think doing their best for sure. But it is definitely something that lands so poorly all the time.
I agree, 100%. Now, you guys both had diagnosis and everything was fast tracked, right? Like you had to start chemo and Maddy, you said you did radiation and surgeries and all of that. But when you were diagnosed, and you were both diagnosed young in your 20s, was fertility preservation like ever brought up in the conversation in those beginning stages of your diagnosis?
There was the day that I started chemo and it started very quickly. Like we planned to start on a Monday. They got the CT scan back on a Thursday and they were like, oh no, we're starting today. Like it grew a lot in the last week. So that day, a fertility specialist came in and it kind of felt like if you were to go to a restaurant and they would tell you the specials. And then at the very end of it, they were like, we're out of every single one of them. They went through every single option and were like, okay, so the best option would be to freeze your eggs with sperm, but you're single and you don't have time. So we're not going to do that. The next best option would be for you to just freeze your eggs alone, but you don't have time. So we're not going to do that. So this third option that we're going to do is we're going to have you take shots and hopefully that helps in slowing down your ovulation. Any questions? And like my mom and I deal with things through humor, especially that week. My mom and I were just like laughing the entire time. I was like, so what I'm saying is I should head out to the streets of Philly and try to find a sperm donor, or what do you mean here? So it was, especially because it was fast track. I had that conversation. And at the time I remember being like, that sucks. And also, the only option here is to do chemo in order to not die, because if I die, then it doesn't matter about fertility. It wasn't something that I had an ounce of space capacity to process in that moment. I just was like, all right, cool, let's keep going.
Did you want to have kids like before all of this happened?
I've never been someone that was like, I need to have kids on my game of life. I am here to be a mother. That is my purpose. That's just never really been my thing. I just was like, all right, whatever. We'll figure that out at some point in time, or we won't. Who really knows? And I feel like fertility is also so wild that there's so many people I knew who struggled with fertility who'd never been through something like this. And one of my cousins, his wife had cancer, didn't freeze her eggs, and has 3 kids. It's just the type of thing that there's so many different ways that it could go. And I just was like, whatever is meant to happen will happen.
Absolutely. I love that mindset that you have, because I feel very similar in the sense of, in my 20s, I thought like all I wanted to do was be a mom. Then I hit 30 and I was like, not sure I want to do this. Then I got a cancer diagnosis and I'm leaning more towards no, but I did have the option to do fertility and I have that insurance policy. And so I feel lucky in that sense. I could see that being like totally devastating for someone who was just like, this is my purpose in life, to be a mom, and to maybe not have that chance. And to not have, it's not even you had options, but just no time for those options. You had to prioritize saving your life. But I also think it's a great mindset to be in. You know what? If it happens for me, it's going to happen for me. And I'm just going to focus on myself right now. And I applaud you for that. And Maddy, was fertility preservation an option for you when you were diagnosed?
No, wasn't even an option, but my oncologist wasn't worried about it. He was like, I think you're going to be fine. Like, we've seen with this cancer and with this treatment that people don't have issues if they're young. So I hope that's true. I don't know. I haven't gotten tested or anything. So yeah, but it wasn't even an option. They wanted to start chemo, and so we'll see. At that time, I was so young. I was 24, so I didn't even really know if I wanted to be a mom or not. Now I know I definitely do. So again, hopefully it's all good. Yeah, but it's very interesting, the whole world of fertility and hormones and how we're not taught anything really about our own bodies. But yeah, wasn't given an option.
So now that you guys obviously have finished treatment and, have moved forward with your lives, have you guys considered fertility preservation now after cancer, now that you're in remission?
Yeah. So I always knew it was like after treatment. I remember one of the first conversations with my oncologist where it was like, you're in remission. And I remember asking her too, I'm like, okay, I know I can't really control it, but what are the things you recommend to make it not come back? And she was like, exercise. And I was like, okay, any other options? But in that conversation too, she was like, it's good for you to start to think about fertility preservation sooner than later, especially because it's good to do it within, especially like that first year. God forbid it comes back, because within my type of lymphoma, like that first 2 years is really that big time. So they're like, it's definitely good to try sooner than later. So I started the conversations and had a couple appointments in the summer of 2021 in New York City. And I was like, this isn't it for me. I can't do this right now. Then that was around the time that I decided to move out of New York and move back to my hometown in South Jersey. Then again, the next year I started to do a couple appointments and was considering it in like Philly, but like doing it in the same medical system that I had treatment. I was like, this is deeply triggering. I don't want to do this. I'll deal with it when I get out to San Diego. Moved out here, and it was always on my list for 2023. And I was very grateful that I worked for a company that covered fertility benefits. So I was like, it's on my 2023 list. Still have no desire to go through the process, but it's just one of those things. I can do hard things. I've been through cancer. How bad could it be? And then end of January, I got laid off. And so that just really expedited my timeline, where I was like, okay, I'm only going to have this health insurance for so long. And so at the end, between February and March, I went through the process of egg freezing, and it was a journey. I feel there's no, it's all relative, but I feel for the people that had to do this right after finding out that they were diagnosed with cancer, because I've never once heard of a singular woman that has had a walk in the park with the experience. It is challenging. It is wild to pump your body with hormones. It is like very mentally, physically, emotionally disorienting. I have put a lot of work into my mental health, my physical health, my emotional health over the last few years. And that process really shook it. I have a visual of Darla, is it, from Finding Nemo, just like shaking the bag. Like that was fertility on my being, on my system. Like it was tough. It was really tough. And I think so much of it especially was because the chances were low. I don't know what my fertility was before treatment, but like I'm not infertile, but I wouldn't say I'm fertile myrtle either. So it was like, our goal is to get 2 eggs. And of those 2, we hope that we can save 1. And meanwhile, I've talked to other people. They're like, yeah, I got 16 on my first round. I'm like, what the fuck? This seems like a whole lot of struggle for what? And I also especially with the fact that I was on the heels of getting laid off, which was like very disruptive for me. I'm like very grateful for it in a lot of ways, and also trauma. It was very shocking. I was with that job for 7 years. It was very much like my longest relationship. And so processing that while going through this, I think I had a lot of my medical trauma in a box, if you will. I was aware of it. I don't think I was like shoving it down by any means. I obviously communicate about cancer a lot. It's not something that I don't talk about, but how it existed in my body was different. And I think going through the fertility treatments, going in for appointments every day, having blood draws, it just was so triggering. And to this day, I think I'm definitely like getting on stable feet still from like the medical trauma standpoint of how it brought up, how it lives in my body, and like how I'm building my relationship back with it. And I didn't even have the procedure. They got to the point 3 days before we were supposed to do it, and they were like, your follicles aren't growing the way that we think that they should and that we would like them to. We really aren't optimistic that this would be productive. If, you know, there's people that are like, we really want to, I want every egg possible, I want to try. Some people like that like would still go through with it, but I was like, say no more. I will literally never touch these drugs again, and that will be too soon. And so I didn't even end up having the procedure. So it was a journey.
It definitely is a journey. I had to do 2 rounds. I did one before my mastectomy. I did one after.
How was the experience?
I think I was coasting after being diagnosed, definitely coasting through just checking boxes of all the things I need to do before chemo. So
Yeah,
it was
totally
tough there. And my results, first off, like pumping all of those drugs into your body. Like I was already felt unstable because I had just been diagnosed and just not mentally in a good place. And then putting those drugs in my body didn't help. I felt like crazy. I felt really bloated. But I also was like, I need to get this done. And I just need this insurance policy. It was like one thing in my head that I just felt like I needed to do because I never wanted to have regrets. Throughout that process, I found out that I had an extremely low egg count. Had I not been diagnosed, I probably would never have known unless like I was ready to start trying for a baby. And that chance probably for me would have been really low. I did 2 rounds. My results weren't the best. I think my first round, I got 2 eggs. Then I ended up freezing. My second round, I got 4 eggs. But my partner and I at that point decided we wanted to do some embryos because they said you have a better chance. So out of the 4 eggs, we got 3 embryos and those are on ice. But it's still like, even after all that, they had said to me, women your age normally will get anywhere from 15 to 30 eggs. That's like the normal range. And I felt like, what was wrong with me? On top of everything else, now what's wrong with me? So that obviously wasn't a great feeling to not have good results. I'm sure you not even being able to go through your procedure was after all the shots too, of just being like, this fucking sucks. Like, why? After everything, like, why does this also have to be so hard? And I'm sure that you have gone through all those emotions as well. And it's also so expensive. So it's like, was this a waste? Was this worth it after everything?
It's interesting. I think so much of what the processing of it all has been is that I think kind of what I had said before is I'm like, all right, I can do hard things. I can do literally anything. I beat cancer. Put me in the toughest room. I can handle it. And I've had this realization where, yeah, maybe you can, but that doesn't mean you have to.
Right.
Like, I think I had this mentality post-cancer of I am invincible. I can do literally everything. And again, I still think I can do whatever I put my mind to. But that doesn't mean I need to put my mind to things that are going to be damaging just because I've already been through damaging experience so far. So I've definitely found a lot more like softness with myself and with like my life where I'm like, yeah, no, I really actually don't need to be this hyper focused person that like can do all the hard things. I want soft things.
Yeah, I feel you on that for sure. Because I used to be that person too. I would be like, if there's something in front of me that I need to conquer, I'm going to conquer it. And it's okay. It's fine if you can't. Just what you said, just give yourself like some softness and some grace. Because we went through a lot. Cancer is no fucking joke.
I agree. We could be resilient as fuck and still want the softness. I totally agree with that.
There's so much strength in softness. And I think that there's so much societal strength in being hard and being tough and pushing through and powering through. No, it's actually really strong to decide to do something like really soft and gentle with yourself because there's nobody validating you for that. There's nobody giving you a pat on the back. That relationship with ourselves and putting ourselves first is really, I think, where strength comes through.
Totally.
Beautifully said.
Yes.
I love it.
Maddie, have you thought about doing any type of IVF treatments or any type of fertility stuff?
Yeah. I'm terrified, if I'm being truly honest. Yes, I've thought about it, but I don't know if I will. Yeah, I'm about to turn 30, and I was kind of saying just to myself, okay, when I turn 30, I'm gonna at least check and see what's going on in my body around fertility. So it's on my mind, but I'm absolutely terrified, truly. So I don't know. Speaking of softness, I'm not sure.
That's like it's
Yeah.
a normal response. Also knowing results too. Sometimes what happens
Right.
if you could think about like, what if cancer really ruined my chance of fertility? And then you have to find out that news and that blow. And it's like, I think the
Right.
fear of that too is like valid and like a normal response, especially after medical trauma.
Yeah, it's scary. And I have to start getting mammograms. I have one scheduled now because I'm turning 30 and from radiation. So I'm like, okay, one thing at a time. I'm already so anxious about that. But yeah, it's so tough. It's very scary. It's not talked so much about, at least I know in the cancer community it is, but not maybe necessarily from doctors or even from friends and family, where cancer, yes, we have to deal with it in that moment for however many months, but after too, it's like we're still having to deal with things. I'm 5 years out and still things are coming up. Yeah, but it's so nice to just hear, and Shannon, like everything you just said too, resonates so much. Just like being kind and gentle to ourselves and not forcing ourselves to like deal with really hard things if we don't feel like it's right for us.
Absolutely. So you mentioned actually that you have to start breast cancer screenings at 30. I heard you actually say this on your last episode, which aired in August. Is your fear of just like another screening of cancer or the actual test itself?
I think like finding something. I'm not scared anymore about recurrence. I'm now scared about maybe a different cancer, and breast cancer is very prevalent in my mind. One, I have a lot of breast cancer clients, so I'm like constantly talking about it and thinking about it with them. But I basically had a choice between more chemo or radiation. And they said that both had a very high likelihood of getting rid of the Hodgkins. With chemo, I had a higher chance of getting leukemia later in life. And with radiation, I had a higher chance of getting breast cancer later in life. I went with radiation because I was like, I don't think I can do more chemo. Like my body is just, I can't. And radiation was quicker. It was 3 weeks versus 2 months. And they said, if anything, it would be after 5 years. And I'm now at the 5-year mark, which is supposed to be a really like happy and exciting time with lymphoma. You're basically now clear. But now I have this like other fear that's coming up. Yeah. So that's what's going on in my brain. And I'm trying to just stay present as best I can.
Yes, definitely. I think that, again, is a valid response because who wants to find something else? Also, just like knowing that you can like qualify early, do you feel like a little bit grateful for that?
Totally. Yeah. 100%. Yeah, I do. Obviously not excited for the actual mammogram, but I am happy that I get to do it early. God forbid anything does happen, it'll be early. But that 5 years came up real quick.
Do you qualify for early mammograms based off of being diagnosed in your 20s?
I think they said to start them at 35. I very much was like, can we do sooner? What if we did sooner? What if we just checked? I really appreciate receipts. So yeah, I just turned 32. So 3 years. And I did genetic testing too during treatment to just see what was what. And I had not a mutation, but there was like some flag on the BARD1 gene, which I had never heard of, but it was the type of thing that was like, this could lead to a higher chance of breast cancer. It's not as significant as like the BRCA gene, for example, but I remember finding that out and being like, I don't want this information. Thank you so much.
I do not want genetic testing. If I'm being like, I don't want to know.
Yeah.
Just whatever happens will happen. Something to my radiation oncologist told me when I was making that decision. He was like, you can listen to these percentages all you want. For you, it's either 0% or 100%. Everyone's bodies are different. These percentages are just based on studies and all these things. He was like, I honestly would just go with what feels best for you. I wouldn't even listen to all these percentages, which was honestly really helpful. And I revisit that all the time in my brain.
You told me that, Maddy. I remember our first call because Maddy and I actually worked together. She was my nutrition coach after treatment. And I remember you told me that on our first call. And I was like, oh my God, thank you so much. That blew my mind. And I think it is I think there's a lot to be said for the power of positive thinking and like what we believe and
Totally.
whether it impacts the outcome necessarily, like maybe, but I think specifically it impacts our experience as we go through it towards the outcome. So it's just believe you're the zero, and if it comes back then you deal with that. But instead of living in fear, just, and this is I feel like a lot of what I did during treatment, I was like, I attached to the fact that I'm going to beat this and there's no other option, because that made my brain feel better.
And I feel like, I don't know if you all have this experience, but like every step of the way, it was percentages. And even with chemo, it was like, okay, 42% of people had this problem. And I'm like, before they start chemo, they have to like tell me all the possible side effects. And I'm like, it's just kind of crazy and it hurts your brain. So that was just really helpful to be like, okay, I'm the zero. This is not happening for me.
Yeah. I think whatever works for you. I had a similar situation in the fact that I went into my oncologist's office asking for like a blood test that detected cancer. And you get this test every 3 months. Rosalina is on this test. I'm still actually trying to get this test. And my oncologist said, I don't go looking for problems. This is something that I'm not recommending because I think it's going to, if that comes up positive, you're going to constantly live in this space of just now waiting for this to happen to you. But I'm somebody that like, I need to know, I want to know. I think it's if I feel I'm prepared enough to deal, like I just need to feel prepared all the time. I don't like when things happen and it's like a surprise. I agree with that, like of just not putting that into your head that, okay, this is going to happen or this. But I also do know at the same time, like when you know better, you can do better, especially like if I know, then if I carry a gene, I can start getting early testing for X, Y, and Z. So I think it definitely goes, I love the whole mindset thing of just not letting it consume you in your survivorship, but also totally, I get also wanting to get tested at the same time. So
definitely understand it. I just know for my brain, it would mess me up.
Right. When you guys were first diagnosed, just briefly, did you guys find like a community? Did you find support groups, AYA groups, like Facebook groups, Instagram?
My mom actually made me go to the support group near our neighborhood. There's a cancer support community, and I'm so happy she did. Even before treatment started, she brought me there. It was like a AYA group, and it was pretty much all females. There was one guy, and I'm so thankful for it. It was like life-changing, and I'm so happy because it's hard to find a support group that's positive and not really scary. And it was women of all different phases of their cancer journey. Most women were out and in remission. So it was really nice to see people on the other side. And yeah, it was so helpful. So that's what I found. I didn't look, I don't think, into it until after, in terms of connecting with other people. I did too when I was first diagnosed. Family and friends and so many people reached out. I know someone that had this, or I know someone that had cancer. I know someone that went through chemo. Like, you want to talk to them. So I talked to everyone I could. That also really made me feel better because it was just people had better experiences than I was thinking I was going to have. So yeah, that was my experience. The support group was beyond helpful.
I was going to say, with the support group, were there any like AYAs?
It was all AYA.
Oh, all at AYA. Oh, okay,
yeah,
cool.
It was an AYA support group. Yeah, so it was.
Oh my gosh, that's even better.
It was amazing. Yeah, so it was ages like 16 to 40, I think, was the oldest woman. Because otherwise, it's all old people, which is not very supportive.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah, because trying to find support, because I was on like a Facebook support group, and I just like really felt the people who were like posting, they were just like not my like around my age range.
Yeah.
And so I got really frustrated because I was, am I the only one in my 20s
Right.
that got
Totally.
breast cancer? So I'm so glad that you found an AYA support group because those are needed way more. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, and that's why I created like the group that I do now too, because it's really what I needed. And then when I moved back to Austin, I like called there was like a support community or cancer community, whatever. And I called and was like, do you have any like AYA support groups? And they were like, the only one we have is terminal. And I don't think that for terminal cancer, and I don't think that'll be very good for you. I was like, okay, can you create a different one? So that was tough. Going back to Austin, I didn't have that community anymore. So that was really hard. But I'm so happy I joined that.
And Shannon, for you, did you find like support groups, or were you like searching for somebody to relate to?
In the beginning, I was very blinders, heads down, just focused on getting through, like, I feel like my own day to day. I started very slowly to chat with the friends of friends, the people that had been through it. But I found that, and I think I followed like the cancer patient and a couple different like accounts on Instagram, but I found that depending on where I was at, if I was in like a good headspace and I was feeling good, it was more challenging to find myself like going down. And don't get me wrong, I love the dark humor rabbit hole that we can
Same.
get down in the cancer community, but it was like, yeah, I love it.
Me too.
But when I was in white knuckling my positive mindset during treatment, I was like, I can't do that right now because that is going to set me off. So I didn't really, and I think Maddy honestly was probably one of the first few people that I like kind of sought out from the nutrition standpoint, especially towards the end of treatment. Because I was like, okay, I've been in pure survival mode, just getting through my own day to day, talking to like people here and there. Definitely made some great friends of friends that I now or keep in touch with, but it took me until getting out of treatment to really find that community. And even then, I think I love within the breast cancer space, like how there is such a strong breast cancer community. And I really don't think that there has been much of that within the lymphoma space for sure. So it was more so of just finding more like individuals here and there and like connecting with like people who had a similar experience. And again, some of them are still like people that I'm friends with and like close with to this day, which is wonderful. But especially during treatment, it just depended on like where I was at, that I was like, you know what, I want to talk about not cancer. And I want to talk about something that like doesn't remind me of what the hell is happening in my body. And so it was just like very selective filtering of when to find that community, and was towards the end and like closer to survivorship for me.
I was also pretty selective as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was very picky with who I wanted to talk to. So Shauna, you're lucky that I wanted to talk to you.
I feel honored, Rosalina, truly.
We were going through the same things. It just, I felt that you were the person that most likely would just be the one that I would connect the most out of everyone else.
We were like a good balance, I think, for each other going through it. Definitely. And that's one of the blessings of support groups, right? I was able to connect with Rosalina. But there's also, like we always say this, like there's always such like a blessing and a curse of social media, support groups, like cancer advocates. Because, you know, you could be scrolling and you're having a great day, and then all of a sudden you see somebody who's now terminal, or you see somebody who's passed, and it can be like, when you're not even like looking for it too, right? You're just scrolling through.
Totally.
And then it's devastating, and it goes like a blow, and then it can change. You could start spiraling because you're like, oh, this person was fine. This person was healthy or in remission or the X, Y, and Z. And then next day, it's not the case. So we do touch on that a lot in the podcast of just, it's great resources, but just be careful, and you dip your toes in when you need to and when you want to, and you take yourself out when you need to and you want to.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
So let's get into the podcast and creating Cancer Actually Fucking Sucks. Maddy, you started the podcast originally with a different co-host. What made you want to do this, and what inspired the name?
I was looking for support or a podcast or something when I was done. Again, this was like 4 years ago now. And there was like nothing. All I found was either breast cancer, which I couldn't relate to, or older people, or just like really sad and depressing. Like I was in Facebook groups and I was like, oh my God, I gotta get out of here. Like, this is terrible. And yeah, I just didn't find anything where people were like actually talking about what happens during like chemo and like the funny stories. Like I have so many funny, ridiculous stories too that happened. And like, I want to talk about them and laugh. We got to laugh a little bit. Like, this is crazy that I'm 24 and dealing with this. And so, yeah, so I was talking to this one girl after she was done, and she was really struggling too. And we were both just like talking about how much we're struggling mentally. This was like probably 4 months out, maybe. And I asked her, she was really funny. And so I asked her if she wanted to start the podcast. She didn't, which is totally fine. She wasn't in the headspace. But I was just like, okay, I guess I'm just going to start. And yeah, it was great. Like, I was able to talk to so many people about their experiences and actually like laugh. Like, I just wanted a place where people could complain and like have a funny story to tell around the cancer shit. And like, there's also so much toxic positivity, if you will, around it too. It's like, be positive and show your strength and don't cry, you know, like whatever. And it's like, no, this fucking sucks. Like, let's talk about it. So that was my inspiration for starting it and for the name. I wanted it to just be very like real and straightforward. And then, and then a couple years into it, Shannon and I had already worked together. We were talking a lot, and I asked her if she wanted. Shannon's funny, as you guys can tell too. And so I asked her if she wanted to join. And so so it's been really magical, and I've met so many amazing humans through it. So it's been a really great experience.
Rosalina and I were, when we were diagnosed and starting the podcast, we like wanted to specifically focus on like breast cancer, because obviously that's what we were going through. Your podcast chooses to showcase so much, like other different types of cancers and other guests. And what made you want to share stories from like everyone in the cancer community and not just lymphoma?
I think because I didn't know anything about lymphoma truly. Like when the doctor, that first ER doctor was like, you might have lymphoma, I Googled it. I was like, I have no idea what this fucking is. And I just couldn't find like other people's stories specifically for lymphoma. And I assumed other people were experiencing that same thing with their type of cancer. And I also didn't even realize that there were so many different types of cancer before I was diagnosed. I had literally no idea. I knew about breast cancer and then other cancer, like just like a term, like an overarching term. Also chemo too. I had no idea that there were different types of chemo. I thought chemo was like one drug that everyone got. Like I just didn't know. And so I really wanted to provide like information for people that were just diagnosed and what they can expect for their treatment, specifically in their type of cancer. So that was why I really just want to talk to any like AYA survivor or someone going through it, and just wanted people to be able to listen when they were, again, first diagnosed, and just know what to expect going into kind of this journey.
And Shannon, what made you want to join the podcast?
In that room, like 4 hours, my 4-hour room, if you will, like I remember thinking like, I want to be on a podcast. I want to podcast more, because living in New York City, I was like dabbling in comedy a little bit. Like I was like dipping my toes in the water of like things that really called to me and filled my cup and brought me purpose. I was holding myself back by like being obsessed with my job and like getting caught up in like perfectionism and fear of failure and all of those things. And I remember thinking it then, and I was like, all right, I'll just put a pin in that. And I remember talking to Maddy again in that same conversation where she blew my mind with 0%, 100% stat. And I remember thinking like, damn, this girl like went through this and has like completely found purpose out of it, is like helping people. Like, I want to do that. That sounds amazing. Like this podcast sounds awesome. Like I'd love to be on a podcast. That's so cool. And then I was like a guest on the podcast at one point, which was fun. And yeah, it was just always like something in my peripheral. And then I remember she asked me and I was like, of course, Maddy. Like I remember when you texted me, I was so excited. And yeah, I'm just a big proponent too of ask and you shall receive. Like that this opportunity came up in the universe. I very much believe that we have a lot of power. I'm a little witchy. And I think about it not to like, I don't know, blame myself even, but like back when I used to work in my corporate environment, I used to like around and be like, I wish that I could have maternity leave, but I don't want a baby and I don't want to get pregnant. Like, how do I do that? I want to break from all of you. I just would love my maternity leave. And then I got sick and I was like, oh, I got my maternity leave except for I am the baby. Everyone is taking care of me. Like everyone cares so much about my bowel movements. What is happening? And just little things like that. I remember like looking back and being like, be careful what you wish for. But I remember, like with the podcast with Maddy, like just thinking, wow, that's something that I think is so powerful and so impactful. And I found a lot of power in my own experience through like storytelling and being able to tell my own story, being able to make sense of my own story, not even just from a cancer standpoint, but like throughout my whole life of recognizing the ways in which everything works together. And I think it's a really powerful way to take power back over a situation, is to talk about it and really own it and claim it for yourself. And like having the opportunity to continue to share snippets of my own and supporting people in doing that throughout their own experience, I think has just been like so powerful and so healing. And I remember how great it was when I recorded my episode right after it was actually, I remember we recorded right when I was like in between treatment and finding out that I was in remission. And like the episode came out right when I was in remission. And I remember like the first episode that Maddy and I recorded, we ended up posting on like the 1-year anniversary of the last day of chemo. So it's so many little things that have been like so synchronistic throughout it. I'm like, wow, universe, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I know, that's incredible. But also like all the guests that you brought on and how they felt when they listened to their story too. I just feel like there's some sort of healing as well that they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
for sure.
And it's been such a tool in helping me heal perfectionism in a lot of ways, because so much of what would hold me back from doing a podcast or doing anything is like feeling like it needs to be perfect. And like,
Yeah.
Maddy and I have fun with it. We're scrappy.
And
We
I'm
don't
the same
overthink
way.
it.
Yeah. I used to be a perfectionist to the point. But the thing was that like you were a perfectionist, but when you're like trying to do something, you don't do it because you're like, it's not perfect enough yet. So I can't like dive my feet in. And then it's like now you're being like quote unquote like lazy. You're not doing the thing because you're like, it's not the way that I want it to be. And so you don't end up doing it. And so that's what happened. And I'm like, I'm not doing this with the fucking podcast.
Yeah, totally. That was so much of my like awareness in the fucking room after I was diagnosed. It's, oh my God, that's holding me back from doing so much. Just fucking do it. Like Nike status. And I think to your like initial point, Rosalina, is like, when I get in my head around being like a perfectionist, it doesn't matter. There's people that listen. And even if it touches 2 people and that brings them some sort of peace, some sort of power, some sort of healing, that makes a difference. And that matters so much more than, I don't know, our audio, like our schedule of posting. That is truly out the wall. People are like, when is the episode posting? Maddy and I are like, we have no idea. Good question. Do you have any others?
We'll let you know after it's live.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. It'll be a surprise for all of us. Like, it just, nothing matters. I feel like that's so much of what I've discovered throughout cancer and everything. I'm like, nothing matters. The shit that we spend so much energy on, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Yeah, what you're doing, if it touches 1 or 2 people or somebody gets like a relatable moment. I think for me that was like with our podcast, I just want somebody to find something relatable and just feel like it's not just them, they're not alone. That was like the big reason I think I wanted to do this. And so I very much agree, like if it touches anybody, it's worth it. It's even worth all the scheduled posts and just doing the recording and putting the energy and the time into it. 100%. I agree. You guys have actually decided to stop Cancer Actually Fucking Sucks and at the end of the year. What led you to this decision?
Yeah, it's tough. We haven't talked about it. This is the first time we're talking about it on air, if you will. And it's bittersweet. For me at least, I don't feel as like excited about it. I think now that I'm a few years out, 5 years out, it's almost a bit draining, if I'm being honest, for me in terms of my energy. And I love it. And I'm so happy I was able to create this somewhat of a community and have people listen and find support or relate to stories and things like that. For me personally, it's been a little bit like interestingly triggering to talk to other people that are in it or having like tough experiences. It's just been a little harder for me farther out. And I also am like shifting my focus in terms of coaching. I still do and focus on cancer survivors, but I also do hormone health coaching and have changed my language around on social media. And I just don't feel as excited about it. And it's more like draining for me now. And I feel like having that energy for me, I think it's like just the universe telling me or my body telling me maybe it's time to just step away. If it's not feeling good, don't maybe lean into it like you have been. So that for me is why. But Shannon, yeah, for you, I'm curious too.
Yeah. It's similar. I think, and it hits on some of the stuff that I was talking about earlier with fertility and just how my relationship with cancer is changing in my body. I think early on from the moment I was diagnosed and through, this past year, I identified very heavily with being a cancer survivor, and I got a lot of healing in like intellectualizing and talking about my experience mentally, and I process it verbally quite a bit. And now that, again, I think like part fertility stuff, and I blame fertility a lot. It's just, I've had a year. And so my relationship with my body is changing, and the way that this trauma lives in my body is changing. And so to Maddy's point, we've had episodes where we've been recording and I've been like, whew, I am triggered and I don't really know what to do here because I'm holding space for another person.
Yeah, it's been hard to like hold that space and not be so in my head too. Like Shannon's she's very good at communicating. You're very eloquent, Shannon. But that's like my relationship with, sorry to take over, but my relationship with
it's true.
cancer is changing, and for my own body is changing too. So thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, Maddy and I both coach in different capacities. She does the nutrition, I do breath work, and we both support the cancer community. And I think I'm finding it more like, I think I have a finite amount of energy, period. We all do. And the energy that I have to like support the cancer community right now, I'm finding more energy and more support in like that one-on-one support with folks that are working through treatment and being able to hold that like very personal space for them and like that more intimate support. And so it's just recognizing that we have a finite amount of energy. I'm in a transition too, where I'm focusing on like doing breath work full time and like shifting and just doing like a reassessment of where my energy is going. And it's been something where it's bittersweet. It's hard. And even like over the past like 2 weeks, I've had 2 people be like, the podcast is amazing, never stop. I'm like, fuck. I hear them, and that's so real. And I need to put myself first, which feels radical and feels selfish, knowing how many people this is helping. And also, to Maddy's point too, like I'm a big proponent. I'm like, listen to your body, listen to what your body's telling you. If we're sitting in episodes and our body is, please run away, like we got to honor that. And I hope that it like gives people permission to take the space that we were like, if you're thinking of starting a podcast, especially in the lymphoma community, do it. There is absolutely people that want to hear your voice. There's absolutely people who want to tell their stories. And I think it's amazing that you all do those too. And so it's this way in which I've been taking the pressure off myself, where it's like, all right, it's really not that big a deal. I think we can overhype our impact and like I need to do this because of XYZ. You really don't. Like everyone's going to be okay. There are other ways for support, and not just within this context. I think in any context we can put such importance on going to this party or doing to this thing. No one cares. Like we really don't need to put that much pressure on ourselves. So it's been challenging and bittersweet, and been waffling on it. And that's part of why I wanted to talk about it today, is because I'm like, all right, we need to get it out there, because otherwise it's going to keep changing my mind every time somebody says never stop. And I'm like, oh gosh.
Because we'll also do episodes too where after Shannon and I are like, we should keep going. This is such a good one.
Yeah. And it's hard. And I think it's a beautiful and idealistic to think that every decision that we make is going to be one that comes with 100% certainty and clarity and feels easy, and we feel happy about that decision. But really hard decisions, and sometimes, not to label right and wrong, but sometimes the decision that is best for us comes with sadness and comes with challenge and comes with grief. And that doesn't mean that we don't do it. I think if we avoided that, we would do this forever at the expense of our own mental health. And at the end of the day, choose your hard. And this is hard, but
thank you for such like honest answers, because it's so true of just like, you can just like, not just to keep doing this because other people are loving it and that's wonderful, but having it not be like authentic to what you're feeling and how like you are wanting to live your life. And, also too, like growth and healing and moving on and pursuing other things. That was just such a really honest answer. And I really appreciate that, because having a podcast it's a lot of time. It's a lot of energy. It's a lot of planning. It's a lot of everything. And then you have a community that comes with the podcast. You have people reaching out, and it fills my cup too. Like we'll get great responses of people being like, this podcast has been like amazing, and I can't thank you enough. And you're like, oh, great. Like we're making a difference, and we are making a difference. But like it also too, like there's days where we've scheduled things and like we've had like, just like wanted to take a mental health day and chose to do that and honor what our bodies are telling us to do, because this space, as wonderful as it is, can be really consuming and really hard and really. So I think just you honoring what you guys, like your bodies and what like your hearts are telling you to do, is unbelievable, incredible. And the work that you guys have done and highlighting other people's stories, and that's been incredible too. And that doesn't take, just because you guys want to stop, doesn't take away from all the good you've put out in the community.
Thank you. That means a lot. Appreciate it.
Not me tearing up over here. Thank you. Yeah, I am physically incapable of anything but brutal honesty. It's honestly a challenge sometimes. So you will always get the answer that is fresh on my brain.
Honestly, and like cry it out. Like we all have cried on this podcast. Like,
oh yeah, I fucking love crying. I wish
Quite
it was a required thing everyone to do.
It should be required.
Brush your teeth, cry. Everyone would be so much healthier. It's just emotions.
100%. So let's talk about like cancer and how that factors into your identity. And obviously, I think part of that is maybe also why you've ended the show, or just choosing to end the show too. Do you feel like this has, like become part of your identity and you're just ready to, cancer's always going to be a part of your stories, correct? Do you feel as though like you just don't want this to like fully define who you are?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it's still such a big part of my identity. Truly, my entire life changed because of it in a really positive way. Like what I do every day is because of cancer and because of my experience. So it is a really big part of my identity. When people ask, oh, what do you do? Like the first thing, I'm a health coach because I had cancer. Like it's so part of who I am. And I think it's like a beautiful thing. I also really encourage people to embrace it, even though it sucks, but it can turn into something so beautiful. And it gave me a second chance of just really shifting my perspective and who do I want to be and what do I want to be doing in this world, on this planet that we're not here for very long. So for me, it's a really big part of my identity still. And even without the podcast, it still will be. Like I, again, still talk about it every day. And I'm like proud of it and try to embrace it, even though it's still like scary sometimes.
Yeah. It's definitely, I don't know, honestly, when it comes to like the identity piece, because I think it was something that I really latched onto, especially early on. And I think a lot of it was because I had that, I did this, I beat cancer, I can do anything. And so that was something that I was very vocal about everywhere, always. Even in my job before, it was something that I talked about. Like it's something that have even still posted about on LinkedIn. Where like we had a guest recently that was like, yeah, that's actually like it could impact your employment. I'm like, fuck me, I guess I'm working for myself forever. But it was very much something that, similar to Maddy, when I look at like the net results of my cancer experience, it's been positive. And I think especially because I have a tendency to lean on toxic positivity throughout my own processing, my own life. And I think, not to say that it was toxic by any means during treatment and after, but I leaned very heavily into the gratitude and I leaned very heavily into the fact that it was allowing me to change my life for the good and allowing me to lean more into my own authenticity and living in a way that's true for me and gives back in a bigger way than I felt like I was. And that's where breath work was so powerful for me too, because it allowed me to still process those more challenging emotions. And I wasn't ignoring them by any means, but breath work really helps put them in perspective because it quiets your conscious mind and allows you to feel into your body. And that's where our emotions are. So I was still feeling into those more challenging emotions. I just wasn't attaching to the stories that came with them. And I wasn't getting carried away with the challenges, if you will. Again, I was like feeling the feelings and choosing to go more positive with it. And honestly, I think throughout this past year with getting laid off and now starting my own thing and very intentionally choosing a slower life, slowness comes with space and space comes with opportunity for stuff to come up. So I think I've had more balance in the way that I view my cancer experience because I have more clarity, not even more clarity, but I have different clarity around how much I lost from it and how much I miss my life before I was diagnosed and how much I miss that chapter of my life and how I was very intentional about changing it. And I didn't try to go back to the life I had because I knew I was a different person. And in that chapter, I was very much like, yeah, this is what I want to be doing. I know that's not going to work for me. And now I feel like a lot of that grief is coming up and the recognition that like, oh, I was a different person. Yes, of course, I'm still the same, but there's definitely parts of that I miss. And I think, again, losing that job has been a big component of that. So all that to say, when it comes to cancer being as significant of a part of my identity, yes, I still have a lot of strength and power in it. And also, it's something that even these days when people are like, oh, how'd you get into breath work? Like, not every day do I want to be like, get into my cancer story. Like, it just exists differently in my body. So I'm big on like expansion versus transformation. I think that insinuates like changing and being completely different. I think I'm just like expanding outside of the cancer identity where it's still definitely a part of me, but I'm allowing for more things to exist where it's not, to your point, Shauna, it's not the defining factor. It's not the only thing that I've gone through. It's not the reason for everything. It is a reason for a lot of things. And again, I still lean more heavily on gratitude, but as more of the grief has come up, it's something that I'm like, okay, I just don't need to be in that all day, every day, and identify with it in the way that I used to.
We have a whole episode this season on like grieving who you were before cancer, grieving everything. Like,
oh my gosh.
And so we've also have had to sit with that. I'll shift the mindset of we can grieve who we were. We can miss who we were. The grieving part like doesn't go away. That was like another thing we wanted to highlight. There's no timeline on that. There's no timeline on healing. There's no timeline on grief. And I agree with you very much of, yes, there's days where it pops up very heavily, I think, for me. And then there's days where I feel like I'm fine, I'm okay. But I think that's part of survivorship.
For sure. Yeah. I talk about that a lot with clients and in my group program too, of like grieving your previous self, and everyone can relate to that. And especially right after, I don't know if you all felt this, but you want so bad to go back to normal, whatever that means, quote unquote, so bad to go back to that person, that life. Our bodies and brains are different. And yeah, that grieving process is so real.
100%. We've talked about that. I think after chemo and after radiation, we both just wanted to fast track through. Fast track, let's get back to life. Let's go back to the way things were before. It doesn't work like that. I had to process so much trauma before like I could feel like joy again. I didn't even realize that was going to be a part of survivorship. And do you feel like people don't talk about how hard survivorship is?
Yes.
You didn't feel prepared for that?
Oh my God. No, that's why too I started the podcast also, because no one was talking about that. Everyone was like, you're good, go live your life. You should be so happy that you're like alive. And I'm like, I'm fucking terrified and my anxiety's through the roof and I can't sleep. And yeah, it was terrible. That really was the reason for all of this and why I do. Because it's, oh my God, after you just feel so alone and isolated and confused and don't know what to do.
Yeah. And there's so much expectation in society for people to get over things, whether it's cancer or not. Oh, this happened, get over it. And it's like, I don't think we get over anything. And I think in like people's attempt to get over things, that's when they don't actually process things. And so in actually being, I'm a very intentional processor, like in being intentional with it. Yeah, to your point, Shauna, like time doesn't heal all wounds necessarily. Like time helps and being intentional about it helps, but it's always going to be a part of us and it's always going to live in our bodies in different ways. It would be doing ourselves a disservice and not being honest with ourselves to recognize that. I think society just has a hard time with that, of being like, yeah, no, things aren't always rainbows and butterflies. Like things don't just like magically go away and get better. Shit's hard.
Oh, definitely. Let's talk about maybe some like lifestyle changes that you guys have done like since being diagnosed, and let's highlight also too like the work that you guys are doing now. So what were some like major lifestyle choices that you guys made? Maddy, you can start. After being diagnosed.
Well, after being diagnosed, like during treatment, I didn't do anything. I was like, didn't even think about it. I was just like, I'm going to eat whatever I can. But after treatment, again, was like for me when shit hit the fan, like mentally and physically, honestly, I had a lot of side effects after. But yeah, that's when I started leaning into or looking into nutrition. And I was not healthy at all before. I was like eating Taco Bell every weekend, always hungover. And I was just like, okay, the things I'm putting into my body must be making a difference, right? And so, asked my doctor, like, should I be changing my diet at all or anything? And he was like, just like follow the Mediterranean diet. That's the healthiest. And I was like, okay, well, I have no idea what that is. And then my job wasn't fulfilling anymore. I wanted to like help people. I wanted to help myself to feel better. So went to the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, which is a year-long health coaching program. And that's where I just learned so much about my own body, what feels good for me. Yeah, so I changed a lot. I started cooking, which I never did before. Started eating really clean. I stopped eating red meat. I definitely still drink, so I will say that. Did not stop drinking, but drinking maybe less for sure. And then in terms of, I was always pretty active, but I think I started doing movement and exercise that actually like feels good for my body and doesn't kill it. Like I was doing Orange Theory all the time, and that just didn't feel good anymore. Yeah, so that kind of physical nutrition exercise wise, and then just mentally, I was never into I didn't even know what like mindfulness was. Like I never did anything like that. So that really changed too. Just starting to be really mindful in general, but journaling and reading into gratitude and yoga, just lots of different things that has really helped me and still helps me. So yeah, lots of different things that I changed. And the nutrition piece was really big.
Yeah. I feel like from today here to like beginning of 2020, 2019, like pre-cancer, like my lifestyle has done like a 180 in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. Maybe like a 170, if you will, but like it's been pretty significant. Like before I lived in New York City, I had an intense corporate job. I was like work hard, play hard mentality. I worked, I drank, I talked about work, I thought about work. I was hungover or I was anxious, and it was normal. I was celebrated for it. I was really good at my job. I was like getting promoted. I got promoted the same week I was diagnosed. Like it was my entire life. It was my entire identity. And so going through treatment, getting diagnosed, I think that was one of the biggest shifts for me, that like in my, 4 hours of life awareness, my job didn't come up once. It was not like, oh, I wish I was working harder. I really want to keep climbing the corporate ladder. It was like, no, fuck that. You're giving that far too much energy. And so I think that was a big piece of it, of just recognizing I am a whole ass human outside of my career. And during treatment, I went real deep on like healing of all sorts, where like physical, of course, but also like mental, emotional, spiritual, and recognizing that so much of my personality and who I was a product of avoiding my emotions in a lot of ways, whether intentionally or not. It wasn't all intentional, but a lot of it was chasing my career, getting validation there, getting my self-worth there, connecting with people over alcohol and connecting with people over, again, with work in a lot of ways. And so it brought me a lot of awareness. That was when I really got into meditation, was during treatment, of just actually recognizing what the mind body connection was. And I think it's like mind body, but also like mind body soul. And so I feel like that was very clear for me during treatment of, oh, this is what it actually feels like to not be spinning. Like my mental health was the best during treatment, which sounds radical, but I took all expectations off myself. I took pressure off of myself. I very privileged and grateful that like I did have a job that I didn't have to worry about. My family was taking care of all my basic needs. I was getting overwhelmed with love and support. So I was like, oh, it's actually, if I can feel this way while I'm literally undergoing chemotherapy, it's got to be possible to feel this way in the real world in some capacity, because this is quote unquote the hardest thing ever. And again, it was very hard. I wasn't the best, but again, my mental health, my ability to actually process things was strong. And so when I went back to my life in New York, that I was very excited to get back to, that I was convinced that, oh no, I could still drink. I'm still going to be the same fun person. I'm just like different. Actually, no, I didn't think I was going to be different at all. That was cute. And then I like had a couple times where I like drank too much, and I was like, okay, this hangover feels like chemo. That's not it for me. Why am I choosing this for myself? Why am I choosing to do this to my body when I just fought so damn hard to keep it alive and keep it here? That was when I got into breathwork, which like really deepened that like healing component, because again, it allowed me to have even more clarity on like the why am I like this? What's going on here? What is it that is getting me to fall back in these patterns? And yeah, I like moved out of New York City in September of 2021 after thinking I'd never leave New York. So that's also a big identity piece, is living in New York. Shauna, you're in New York, right?
I'm in New York, and yeah, it is like a huge part of my identity. And it's like so funny. I feel like a lot of my friends are like, all right, we're ready to leave. And I'm like, I'm not ready to leave. I love the hustle. So I'm somebody that like, I love a hustle, but I also like value rest. So I think that's why I've been able to stay here as long as I have.
Yeah, totally. I found that for me, I just made the choice to like, instead of trying to adjust my lifestyle in patterns that were already deeply rooted in New York of never resting at all, I just decided to like start fresh. But I think I left New York in some ways before I was ready, because I was like, I know this is going to be challenging. And even leaving New York, I like had such awareness around my energy there and how closed off I was there and how I had to be like so heads down around different things. Definitely my relationship with alcohol changed a lot. I used to smoke a ton of weed. That changed a lot too, especially like my poor lungs. They've been through a lot, like very cognizant of that. and just the way it impacts my mental health. I feel like for a while it was my tool to survive and to feel like I was thriving, but really my mental health was just hanging by a thread for a very long time, but I was productive and I was having fun. So I thought I was good. And the biggest perspective, I would say, the biggest lifestyle changes after was like actually prioritizing my well-being and like actually choosing to slow down and being intentional about it. And it's hard because I'm wired to not do that. So it is a constant rewiring, but it is very, I think, just necessary for our bodies to heal, is for our bodies to rest and for us to actually like feel into what's happening versus just keep running on through it.
Yeah, I like feel you so much because right after I completed treatment, I went back to my old ways, drinking a lot, coming back home 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. And then that's when I had, I guess, a mental breakdown. I'm like, I don't understand why I'm doing this to myself when I literally, like what you said, Shannon, like I fought for my fucking life to be here and to like be in remission and like not having cancer come back. And so I did a lot of work as well of I still drink, but not as much as I did before. And then also talking about the corporate ladder too, because I was at the same mindset too. With work, I wanted to get to the top. And like to get to the top, you're like working so much. You're in work really early in the morning before your manager comes in, and then you don't leave until they leave. I was just like that way. And I really wanted to like be a star essentially. And with cancer, that's when I realized that I don't necessarily want to do that. I want to be in a place where I feel content and happy where I'm at with my job, but it's an economic relationship to me. And it's like my work is not my identity, where before it used to be. And so that mindset has also changed for me too. Yeah.
Totally. That really changed for me also. Because we're like taught that's what we do, right? Like you work hard, you get to the job, whatever that means. And then after like perspectives are just so different. I'm just like, this doesn't fucking matter literally at all.
Yes.
Like you said, like this is my job. I make money to live my life the way I want to live it. And 100%.
Exactly.
Yeah. Burnout is so normalized and it is so societally celebrated. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not. I refuse. It's physically taxing. It causes like such inflammation, which is bad for our bodies. And like stress is toxic. So we, of course, can't get rid of stress. Like it's inevitable. My body is still finding things to be stressed about, but I'm not, again, I'm not choosing things and choosing environments that are high stress. Like I've worked in a very high stress environment. I'm like, I don't need that. I don't need that. I need to figure out how to pay my rent, but I don't need that.
I'm a very anxious person just in general. And now I have learned ways to cope with anxiety and help. But looking back to like, I was so anxious, especially around work. Every day I would wake up so anxious. If I had a call, I'd be anxious, like just anxious about so many things. I also was, again, very unhealthy and drinking a ton. So that didn't help with anxiety now looking back either. But and then my anxiety lives in my chest. Like that's where I feel it. And that's where I had my mass. And so I'm not saying that caused it, but I don't think that helped either. And so I truly believe in the mind body connection too. Like Shan, you were explaining, and stress is just so hard on the body and the mind. And so now that's a really important thing for me to try to keep my stress and anxiety low.
I didn't really know that I was such an anxious person.
I didn't either.
I was diagnosed with cancer. Yes. Yeah. Now I realize like I am really much an anxious person.
Oh, I knew from the jump I was an anxious person. I knew. I was a hot mess.
Yeah, I was somewhere in the middle. Somewhere in the middle.
But I agree with you on the sense of like my anxiety is always in my chest too. It's like my chest, my gut. That's where I feel it. And like it is like the mind body connection. We talked about it actually this season with a doctor that we had as an expert, and just talking about, we had a big talks about that. But also I know you guys like brought up on your podcast, like The Body Keeps Score. Like it's a book I've read. It's a book, especially from trauma. Like I had trauma early in my life, and just how our bodies deal with trauma and stress and all of that. And so I my lump was on my right side, like in my chest. And I resonate with what you're saying on that sense of, I knew I was anxious. I knew I was stressed out. I mean, just always like life balance is just hard in general. Like, how are we supposed to work a 40+ hour job a week? How are we supposed to prioritize family, friends, relationships, ourselves, errands, fun? It's just like in a 7-day period every week. Yeah, it's just impossible. There's so much pressure about that.
Oh my gosh. Also, I just want to mention so when I got a new job and I was like a year in, my boyfriend's like, when are you going to try to get promoted? Is that your goal? And I'm like, no, it's not my fucking goal.
You're like, I'm not
get promoted. No, I don't want to be a manager. I'm sorry. That's too much work. No. Where before, like, I used to be that way. I don't want more stress in my life. I do great with what I do right now, and I just want to stick it like just there. So
I like fully resonate with that. Yeah, like I'm good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think again, like that can come across as radical because we're like raised and society is so focused on going corporate growth. And it's no, I don't need that. Yeah. I don't need that.
Yeah.
There's such strength in that. There's such power in that. Good for you.
Maddy, you've mentioned your health coaching. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that and your programs?
Yeah, so I focus on cancer survivors once they're done with treatment. And then I also focus on just general health coaching. And I'm now moving more into hormone health coaching as well for women. But for the cancer program, so I do one-on-one coaching and I do group coaching as well. So the one-on-one is more custom. We meet every week. We like create a plan for the whole week together in terms of like meals, exercise, any mindfulness practices we're incorporating, all that good stuff. And then, of course, just talk through all of the nuances that we just talked about, going through the survivorship phase of cancer with just grieving our previous selves and finding what fills us now and all of that different stuff. So that is more one-on-one and again, just more customized to the client. And then with the group, we meet, it's an 8-week group program. It's called Mindfully Thrive After Cancer. And we touch on nutrition, mindfulness, and habit development after cancer. And then, of course, it's a group. So we talk about, again, all the things. It's very interactive and each week is a different topic. We also have a breathwork session that Shannon leads in one of the weeks. And yeah, it's amazing. I'm like so happy I started the groups. One, it helps me just be able to reach more people. And then two, it just helps also if people are really looking to connect with other survivors. It's like a really supportive place to do that. So yeah, so those are the two programs I have for survivors.
Sounds amazing. Shannon, you are a breathwork coach. Can you maybe explain a little bit more about what you do? And
Absolutely. Yeah. If you told me in like 2018, 2019, I'd be a breathwork coach, I'd be like, what are you talking about? What even is that? I discovered breathwork, like I said, like shortly after I got into remission. And essentially what breathwork is, it's any use of putting attention and intention behind your breath. So even like going for a run, yoga breathing, like breath work does have roots in more like Eastern practices. So yoga, Tai Chi, Tibetan Buddhism, meditation, of course. The type of breath work that I do, it's more involved. It's much more of an active, kind of intense meditation. And what it does is it helps quiet your mind and drop you into your body in order to release and really just let your body do what it needs to do. Like our conscious minds, they are so wonderful. I'm so grateful for my mind. And also, they can be emotional terrorists and they're wired to keep us safe. And sometimes they're keeping us safe from emotions. And sometimes they're keeping us safe from stuff that like we actually want to do because we are fearful of it. And because we have experiences that live in our subconscious that prevent us from doing it. So in doing breath work, what it does is it allows you to really actually access your subconscious a bit and like clear stuck energy and process trauma physically, mentally, emotionally, and can allow for a lot of completing the stress response, for example, and just like general like emotional release and management. So it's been so helpful for me as a highly emotional person and also a highly anxious person to help me make sense of my emotions and like actually physically process them and feel them, and also manage my anxiety because so much of anxiety is when we feel a sensation in our body and our brain runs with the worst possible scenario, it helps to, throughout doing breath work, like you drop into the breath and you train your brain to envision that best possible outcome, that best case scenario, and truly like rewriting neural pathways, because that's like all is happening in our brains. It's just patterns that we get accustomed to. So all of that to say, I work with both individuals on a coaching capacity, whether we're like working on a specific goal or working through processing like one specific thing from the one-to-one standpoint. I also do a lot of community sessions, both within San Diego, where I live, and virtually, and also have a group program as well that's really focused on, it's called Collectively Well, and it's really focused on helping people develop a real world well-being like protocol, plan, whatever you want to call it, that works for them. And it's 3 months of breath work in order to really help you establish your own mind-body connection, start to build that compassionate relationship with your body, spirit, your intuition. Like so much of, in my humble opinion, like what's true for us, what's real for us lives in our gut, lives in our intuition. It's that gut instinct that like our mind, the world makes it hard for us to hear and listen to and follow. And so it helps us to really drop into that, do some like reflection, processing of past stuff to understand like, why am I like this? Why am I like this? I ask that question often. Breathwork often helps me find the answer. And then also get more intentional around building a life that is more authentic to you, where you're really allowing yourself to be with who you are and accept your humanness. And I try not to be like too like, go action oriented, do all the things, because sometimes we just need to rest. And sometimes that's what's authentic to you, but really helps you to like build a life that is more supportive for you. And the really focus of it being like collectively well is, I think, especially in the wellness space, is so self-oriented. And it's so focused on putting myself first. And sometimes we need to do that for sure. I literally said that on this podcast. And also as a collective, I think as the world, like we can't all individually make a difference. We can't all individually heal ourselves. And so that's really doing a lot of this work within the power of community. And I do believe that like there's such a ripple effect. The more we take care of ourselves, the more that light gives people the permission to do the same. And so really like kind of has that focus on, listen, we are going to make the world a better place. And we're going to start with our minds and our bodies and our hearts. And you can find me on Instagram.
Honestly, these programs sound like so incredible and like such great resources for, I don't even think just like people in the cancer community, but just people in general. And where can our listeners find you online?
Shan Cury on Instagram.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Maddy Pollack _health. I also have a website. It's be-yourhealth.com. And then our podcast, Cancer Actually Sucks Pod, on Instagram as well.
Thank you guys so much. If people want to check out your podcast, do you have an episode you recommend that they start on?
That's such a good question. Maybe like Shannon's intro to the pod episode, like when she came on to start hosting. I think that could be a good one.
Yeah. Also, I always love our chemo chat episode. That was such a
Yes,
silly, goofy,
okay,
funny
that's a really good
episode where we just like tell our silly stories about chemo. So that's also a good one too.
It sounds amazing. With the podcast being done, what are you both looking forward to next?
I'm looking forward to, I think, having more space for clients, honestly, and like for the coaching, and just having more mental and actual space and time for that. And I'm looking to build online community around more general health and wellness for women as well. So yeah, it's very bittersweet, but
yeah, so bittersweet. And even with ending the podcast too, it's one of these decisions that I'm like, I don't even know. I do believe that we need to say no to things to make space for new things. And I'm definitely focusing on expanding my own coaching capacity and offerings around breath work for sure. But I also think that I'm just like putting my hands up and trusting, saying no to this is going to make space for something else. And I don't even really know what it is. But I think Maddy and I also work with Do Cancer, which is a nonprofit that provides free and holistic health services to individuals. That's a lot of the work that we do within the cancer community. I think just allowing for more space to really, to Maddy's point, like support individuals and allow for Do Cancer to continue to thrive. And if you're listening and any of what Maddy and I do sounds interesting, check out Do Cancer, because you can access our services for free.
That's amazing. And we'll definitely put both your Instagram handles in the show notes and Do Cancer in the show notes for anybody who wants to check it out. Thank you guys so much for taking the time and coming on the pod. And we're just like, as sad as we are for Cancer Actually Fucking Sucks to end, we're really excited to see what you guys do next. And we wish you like the best of luck, truly.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, and thank you for what you're doing with the podcast too. It's so powerful.
We appreciate it. Thanks so much. Thanks, guys. A very special thanks to our podcast producer, Bethany Allard, and our podcast editor, Ayla Anderson.
Thank you all for listening and supporting our podcast. Sharing our stories with you has been incredibly healing for both of us, and we hope it helps other women in their journeys through breast cancer.
Ladies, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and fellow breasties. Help us reach more women by subscribing and rating us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and now on YouTube. You can follow us on Instagram at TYFTS Podcast and email us at tftspodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from you guys, so shoot us a message. We will link any resources from the episode in our show notes.